We're here with Ben Pollara from United for Care, meeting with the Naples Daily News Editorial Board. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
Can you take the first couple minutes here and talk a little bit about the organization itself, and then we'll get into some questions.
Sure. So I'm the campaign manager for United for Care, which is the organization chaired by John Morgan that placed Amendment 2 on Florida's ballot. We went out and got signatures from over 1.1 million Floridians, 800,000 of which the Secretary of State identified as registered voters, which is what put us on the ballot, in addition to majority opinion of the Florida Supreme Court. And what we're trying to accomplish with Amendment 2 is essentially to legalize the doctor-patient relationship in the state of Florida and allow doctors to, if they believe it is in the best interests of their sick and suffering patient, recommend the use of medical marijuana, and for that patient to be able to pursue their doctor's recommendation without having to fear arrest and live like a criminal. So we are on the campaign trail right now, trying to pass this amendment with 60% of the vote, I think this is really not a controversial issue for most Floridians. I think most people tend to believe that in the course of that doctor-patient relationship, if a doctor recommends a type of treatment to their sick and suffering patient, that patient should be able to follow their doctor's orders without having to fear the loss of their personal liberty. I think the other thing that is also almost universally true and not that controversial is that for almost every Floridian and every American, today if somebody that you know and love was sick and suffering and could potentially be helped by the use of medical marijuana, I think almost every single one of us would be willing to break the law today to get them that treatment. And I think that the bottom line of Amendment 2 is that people should not have to break the law to get their loved ones the medicine that they need, that their doctor thinks is best for them. And I think to a certain extent the opposition to this campaign doesn't even disagree with those basic premises. And you see in a lot of their arguments against Amendment 2, they're not arguing against medical marijuana. In fact, I've been through numerous debates where the person on the other side of the aisle says, listen, marijuana is medicine. It absolutely has medicinal value, and it absolutely has treatment uses, but Amendment 2 is what is wrong. Amendment 2 has all these loopholes. The law itself is bad. Medical marijuana in and of itself is not bad, but this particular law is bad. And they have picked some what they call their loopholes from Amendment 2 to try to challenge us in the court of public opinion. And I think we can go over them one by one here, or whatever your guys' questions are. But I think essentially they're founded on one of two things: either an ignorance or an assumption of ignorance of the actual implementation process of a constitutional amendment, and that this law, Amendment 2 is what it is, and it is immutable, and there is no legislation or regulation that can happen after the fact, when in fact constitutional amendments must be implemented after the fact. But number two, I think willful ignorance of what the Supreme Court actually said when they ruled on this issue. A lot of these so-called loopholes are questions that have been asked and answered and done so in a very clear manner by the Florida Supreme Court. But yet they're continued to be trotted out by opposition as flaws in this law, because they can't find a flaw in the concept of medical marijuana, because there is such universal agreement that marijuana is in fact medicine, and it unequivocally absolutely helps people.
Before we just take that as accepted by everybody, can you talk a little bit about the science that demonstrates that is in fact medicine?
Sure. I mean, and that's one of the documents that I've given you guys is just a small sampling of some of the scientific trials that have been done recently on medical marijuana. 2010 double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial in the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology compared the placebo to cannabis-based medicine, and determined that it was provided a better protection against chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting than the other medications. The American Academy of HIV Medicine says when appropriately prescribed and monitored, marijuana can provide immeasurable benefits for the health and well-being of our patients. There's a study in the European Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology that shows efficacy in the treatment of hepatitis C. ALS patients, marijuana this is from the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care. Marijuana is a substance with many properties that may be applicable to the management of ALS. These include analgesia, muscle relaxation, bronchodilation, saliva reduction, appetite stimulation, and sleep induction. In addition, marijuana has been shown to have strong antioxidative and neuroprotective effects, which may prolong neuronal cell survival. In areas, and this they continue to say, in areas where it is legal to do so, marijuana should be considered in the pharmacological management of ALS. And listen, a lot of the United States is way far behind on the research of medical marijuana, and that has largely to do with marijuana's scheduling status in the United States. Marijuana is a Schedule I substance in the eyes of the federal government, which means that in their determination it has no medicinal benefits and a high potential for abuse. I think the vast preponderance of science and medicine refutes that, at least in terms of having no medicinal benefit. And a lot of the evidence in support of medical marijuana beyond what's happening in other countries is, I guess, what you could call anecdotal, but it is not anecdotal for the people that live it every day. The last thing that I read you was about ALS. There's a woman in Manatee County who I imagine will be at the event that I'm speaking at tonight, Kathy Jordan, who was diagnosed with ALS in 1986. Her doctors gave her 3 to 5 years to live, and 28 years later, and she's still going strong. And she and her husband, Robert, credit that almost entirely to the use of medical marijuana. And in fact, there has been times during this last 28 years where she did not have access to marijuana, and her condition deteriorated significantly from that. So, our opponents like to call this anecdotal evidence, but it is not anecdote to the people who live it every day. Our chairman, John Morgan, is passionate about this issue because, number one, he saw his father die from cancer, and he saw marijuana provide him with a much better quality of life his last couple of years alive. But number two, he sees his brother Tim every single day live a better life as a result of marijuana. Tim was paralyzed from the neck down when he was 18 years old. He's been in a wheelchair almost his entire life. It is extraordinarily painful every single day being Tim Morgan. In addition to being confined to a wheelchair, he's also gone through cancer treatments, I believe 2, if not 3 times. And Tim has told me, and John has made this story known widely, that Tim uses marijuana every single day to get through his day, to calm the horribly painful muscle spasms that are a result of his paralysis, and to be a normal person. He runs the Morgan & Morgan call centers. He's married. He has a little girl. And while his life is still extraordinarily painful, without the use of medical marijuana, he would be a zombie on Percocet and Xanax and highly narcotic, highly addictive, highly dangerous drugs that are really the only other option for a lot of people in the treatment of their diseases and conditions.
You mentioned that marijuana is essentially a drug or a medicine with medicinal properties. Why can't it go through the regular process like any new drug that might be introduced onto the market, through testing by FDA and ultimately sold in pharmacies, just like the pills you just mentioned? Why does it need a special process with dispensaries set up specifically for it and a constitutional amendment for it?
Because it is still a Schedule I drug in the eyes of the federal government, and those kind of studies and FDA approvals simply cannot be done right now. It is very difficult to do them, and I think even again the opponents of this have said this in debates with me. Marijuana should be rescheduled to Schedule II or Schedule III, and that's great. And listen, one day I'm 100% sure that this will happen. But one day, big pharmaceutical companies will figure out a way to monetize this substance in myriad different ways. But in the meantime, people are suffering, and they shouldn't be denied this medicine just because the big pharmaceutical companies haven't figured out a way to make billions of dollars off of it. I'm not going to sit here and look you guys in the face or look your readership in the face and say that marijuana is a completely benign substance. But what I will say, which is absolute unequivocal fact, is that not a single human being in the history of human existence has died from an overdose of marijuana. When I get home to Miami tonight, I am likely going to have a headache, and likely my treatment for that headache will be 2 to 4 ibuprofen. 12,000 Americans die every single year from over-the-counter non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, like Advil, like Aleve, and marijuana has never killed anybody from an overdose. So, should it go through all these processes? Sure, but should the Tim Morgans and Kathy Jordans of the world have to wait and in a lot of cases die while patiently waiting for pharmaceutical companies to monetize this? Absolutely not.
Brendan also mentioned in his question the concept, and you mentioned it at the outset, the whole idea that this needs to be in the Constitution as an amendment as opposed to legislative approval or some other method. Could you go ahead and address that?
Sure. I mean, listen, it doesn't need to be in the Constitution. But it needs to be. It needs to be in the Constitution because our legislators, our elected officials, the people that we have elected to represent us in our state capitol, have not led on this issue. Polls going back to 2010 show broad majority support for medical marijuana. Rick Scott's pollster, Tony Fabrizio, had a poll in 2010 that showed 58% support for medical marijuana. Legislators have been filing medical marijuana bills in the state capitol for years without even getting so much as a hearing. Activists and patients like Kathy Jordan have been going to their legislators, have been going to Tallahassee every single legislative session for years asking for this, and they have not gotten so much as a hearing. And so, listen, I'm a believer in representative democracy. We elect our members of the State House and State Senate and Governor to lead and to legislate issues that are important to us, but they simply have not done so on this issue. They've failed us time and time again on this issue. One of the most hotly debated topics in the last legislative session was whether to increase the allowable amount of a single-serving beer from 32 to 64 ounces. This is the kind of stuff that gets talked about in Tallahassee. Not an issue that potentially affects hundreds of thousands of Floridians that people have been demanding either by lobbying their state legislature or by telling pollsters that this is something that they believe in. But we've been failed again and again and again, and now it is on us as citizens to pass this into law because our elected leadership has abdicated their responsibility to us.
But the legislature did pass Charlotte's Web, and so why is Charlotte's Web not an appropriate thing for treatment for somebody like John's brother?
Well, first of all, I don't think that anybody can argue with a straight face that the legislature would have passed Charlotte's Web if not for Amendment 2 being on the ballot. I think they had, whether found it or not, some electoral political fears about the potential of having a marijuana initiative on the ballot, and Charlotte's Web is at least partially a reaction to that. And listen, I think it was a well-intended piece of legislation, but a very, very poorly thought-out piece of legislation. And I can go into the myriad reasons why Charlotte's Web will help very few people, but just looking at it on its face, there have been estimates that there could be between 100 and 150,000 patients under SB 1030, under Charlotte's Web. Department of Health estimated in the first year of implementation of Amendment 2, that number would be closer to 420,000 patients. So even if Charlotte's Web is implemented perfectly, it helps a little more than a quarter of those who would be helped under Amendment 2. But unfortunately, Charlotte's Web was neither written nor is it being implemented perfectly. I think it's been written and is being implemented very poorly. One of the things that is in our amendment that our opponents have attacked us on is that under Amendment 2, under really any medical marijuana law, there is not a prescription for marijuana. It is a recommendation. It is a physician certification, and that has to do with the Schedule I status of marijuana. Physicians would be at a potential risk of losing their license if they wrote out a script for marijuana on a DEA prescription pad, so it is a recommendation. Charlotte's Web requires physicians to order medical marijuana. There is case law going back to California passing a medical marijuana law in the late 90s that shows that the doctors are at huge liability of losing their license and potentially being subject to civil penalties for the ordering of medical marijuana. That's why we use the word recommend. It was, when you're drafting a constitutional amendment, every word is used for a reason and is very precise. And we looked at the experience of, at that point, 22 other states in drafting ours, and that's why we use the word recommend, because almost no doctor will order marijuana knowing what the consequences of that order may be, and I think the consequences under SB 1030 are that no doctor will do it. And this potentially 150,000 patient base that is cited out there may in fact be dozens or at most a few hundred patients, because doctors are going to be terrified of losing their license under SB 1030. One of the other things that they like to beat us up on is the immunity provided to physicians under Amendment 2. SB 1030 provides no immunity to physicians. So they are at huge personal and professional risk every time they issue an order for medical marijuana under this law.
How can United Procure, or anybody for that matter, kind of guarantee, and maybe guarantee isn't the right word, but let voters be comfortable with knowing that this will not turn into a situation where I think Colorado had a situation where as soon as the medical marijuana proposal passed, before you knew it, there were dispensaries and, to be honest with you, you could essentially call them quacks, signing out and handing out prescriptions like they were candy to anybody and everybody who wanted it, just for those who just wanted to get an easy access to pot. So how can the state essentially then restrict or regulate against that and prevent it from having these things in every street corner, almost like a Starbucks?
Well, number one, again, there's an implementation process, and the state can set limits on the number of dispensaries that exist, and I believe local governments can and should have a good say in what the medical marijuana access looks like in their individual communities. I think it should be tailored for each individual community, not just given down to local governments from a pie and kind of forced down their throats. Number one, but on the basis of it, again, in drafting this law, we were able to look at 22 other states at the time who had done this, and one of the things that we looked at was preventing exactly what you're talking about, particularly forgetting even about the 22 other medical marijuana states, but just looking at what Florida had just gone through during the pill mill crisis, right? And I think one of the reasons that the pill mills got out of control was because you could walk into a doctor's office, say, "Doc, I got lower back pain." The doc writes you a script for OxyContin or Percocet or whatever dangerous narcotic it is that he's prescribed you. You walk out the door and walk into a pharmacy that just happens to be owned by that same physician, where you've got to fill your prescription. You walk in one door with lower back pain. You walk out the back door with a big prescription for deadly narcotic pills. Under Amendment 2, that simply cannot happen. There is a multi-step process for becoming a qualified patient under Amendment 2, which totally obviates that kind of revolving door doc shop that you bring up. Under Amendment 2, you have to go to your licensed Florida physician, be diagnosed with a debilitating disease or medical condition. The doctor has to affirm that diagnosis in writing, also affirm in his or her professional opinion that the benefits of your, as a patient, use of medical marijuana would outweigh the health risks to you, and also attach a timeline to that diagnosis. The doctor then provides you, the patient, with what's called a physician certification, which is this, not a prescription, but in fact a much more detailed document that outlines all those things that I just discussed. You then have to take that physician certification to the State Department of Public Health, and not until the State Department of Health issues you an identification card are you a legal medical marijuana user in the state. So you cannot go in one door, out the other, in with back pain, out with marijuana. It just doesn't work under Amendment 2.
You mentioned, or Jay mentioned, Colorado, and I think California. Other people look at California as how not to do medical marijuana. We see the videos of the sign holders, and obviously people just trying to get high. Out of the 22 states, are there states you could point at on how to do it right? Who has done it right? Who has had medical marijuana and has avoided the problems that Jay mentioned?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I think California is an example, as you said, of how not to do it, and the reasons for that, though, are the same reasons we were on the ballot. Their legislative leaders have failed them in California. They passed a law in 1996. It has been only loosely regulated since then as a result of failure in leadership, in their case in Sacramento. So we're on the ballot as a result of failure in leadership in Tallahassee. They're in basically a de facto legalization state in California as a result of failure of leadership in Sacramento. think you can actually look at Colorado for both an example of how not to do it and then how to do it. A lot of people don't realize Colorado actually passed a medical marijuana law back in 2002. They've had medical marijuana law there for about a dozen years now. But they went through a 6 or 7 year period where they looked a heck of a lot like California. There was very little rules and regulations governing the system, where these pot shops flourished, where it was essentially a de facto marijuana legalization system. And then the legislature got their act together in 2008 and 2009 and passed a very stringent set of rules and regulations on the medical marijuana system. A lot of businesses closed. The ones that stayed open had to tighten their belts considerably, and now they have a adult use marijuana law there, so things are a little different. But there was a few years there where they had and they continue to have a very strict medical marijuana law in Colorado. Arizona is also another good example of a strong, tightly controlled and regulated medical marijuana system. There are also other examples of states that are too tight, the anti-Californias that are too tightly controlled, like New Jersey. I mean, New Jersey passed a law as Governor Corzine was exiting office back in 2008, 2009. The legislature and the new governor dragged their feet on implementing it. It's been implemented for a year or 2 years now, and Jersey, which is a state of 8-10 million people, has, I think, 3,000 qualified patients, and they had 4 businesses serving those patients. I think one went bankrupt. Now they only have 3 for a pretty significantly sized state. So I think there are examples on both ends of the spectrum as to how to do this and how not to do this. And I think that's one of the reasons why Floridians should feel a sense of comfort, and hopefully you guys feel a sense of comfort in recommending this to your readership, is that this is not an experiment. We're not reinventing the wheel here. This is something that has been done in almost half of the states, 23 states plus DC now, and we have an opportunity here in Florida to do it the right way for our state, and also to set an example, hopefully, for the other 26 states in the union who could and hopefully will potentially pass medical marijuana laws in the coming years.
Will the United for Care, whether it passes or doesn't pass, will it continue to operate after the fact, or is it essentially just kind of close up shop? Is it almost like it is a PAC, correct?
It is a PAC.
Okay.
So I mean, it is built for advocating on an electoral issue.
Right.
But we have another organization called Florida for Care, which is opened up in the last few months to kind of serve as a post-election advocacy organization. And first of all, I'm not thinking about a universe in which we don't win.
Sure.
I believe that we will win on November 4th, and we will go to Tallahassee with Florida for Care to advocate for implementing Amendment 2. But in the case that we don't, I mean, listen, this is not a candidate campaign. This is not a binary choice. There may be a binary choice on Amendment 2, but while I'm sitting here today as an advocate for Amendment 2, I've become, and I will continue to be, an advocate for medical marijuana, as will Florida for Care. And so in the unfortunate case that we do not win, I think there will be a continuation of this campaign. The conversation has increased in a huge way over the last year and a half, I think largely as a result of what this campaign has done and the advocacy that our chairman, John Morgan, has done all over the state. And I can't speak for him, but I'm not giving up on all these sick and desperate patients who want this law just because 58% of Floridians vote yes as opposed to 60% plus 1.
I guess where I was heading with that.
To those folks. Sorry.
I guess where I was heading with that question was, in other words, if it passes, for example, will the PAC still be around, and the people like yourself and John Morgan still be around to help guide that implementation, to guide it and help the legislatures with that, and the state, in other words, not just say, oh, we want, okay, now let's step back and let the state figure out, or go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, listen, the history of these campaigns, excuse me, has been that just as important as winning the ballot box is winning the right medical marijuana system in the state capitol, and so we acknowledged that a long time ago, which is why we set up this organization, Florida for Care, to ultimately serve as an advocacy organization in Tallahassee. So yes, whatever happens on November 4th, there will be some sort of continuation of this campaign
Sure.
into Tallahassee, into the next legislative session and beyond, to advocate for hopefully for the proper implementation of Amendment 2, but failing a 60% majority, certainly for a strong medical marijuana law that comes out of the legislature that benefits the hundreds of thousands of sick and suffering, in a lot of cases dying Floridians who are desperate for this, who are begging for this, who are sending us letters and emails and calls every single day.
Okay.
Let me turn Jay's question a different way. Some of the opposition may be that, okay, you have to go to Tallahassee and spell out the rules are, but yet you're asking me to vote on this now. Why not spell out what all the rules are and then say, okay, these are the rules, now vote on it?
In the amendment, I mean, listen, in Florida we have most states have some form of citizens initiative, and in most of those places it is a statutory initiative, meaning that if you win in November, it's a piece of statute just like anything that got passed in the state capitol. Florida is one of the few states that does it the constitutional route. So, number one, I mean, this is our only option for taking this to the people. Listen, the legislature has had many chances to legislate this, and the passage of Amendment 2 will essentially be another chance to legislate this, but one that they don't have a say in, right? They have to implement it. They have to pass a law to act in accordance with the amendment. If what you're saying is just, well, let's just let Amendment 2 fail and let's hope that they'll pass a law. I can't live on that, right? I think they have shown such a failure of leadership on this issue that unless they are forced to create a law through the force of the state constitution, they will not do so, or they will do so in a very restrictive way, like what we've seen in SB 1030.
Let me come back to also the distribution of this. Pot shops, as some people are calling them, the dispensaries, are one of the hang-ups that people have about this. Why not the alternative of having the producer of the medical marijuana direct deliver it to the patients rather than create a dispensary?
That's one of the things that's been brought up under SB 1030. I think they require a vertically integrated operation that includes retail but also allows for delivery. I don't think that that's necessarily the right solution overall. I mean, people don't want marijuana shops in their communities, but they want a fleet of marijuana delivery services running around the state. I don't know. I mean, it's I've been asked a lot of questions on this campaign. I've not been asked that one before, so I don't have an answer for you. I think it is a far from perfect solution to serving patient access in a state as geographically and population-wise large as the state of Florida. I'm sure like a FedEx or UPS could figure it out, but it's beyond my pay grade.
How is it polling right now? How are the numbers?
I think the numbers are all over the place, right? I mean, we're now in that we're T-minus 21 days to election day, so there's a new poll release like what feels like every other hour here, and there's been some that have Amendment 2 in the 50s. University of North Florida had us at 67 last week. Gravis had us yesterday at 55. They previously had us at 60. Prior to that, they had us at 45. So I think it's tough to tell, and pollsters all over the country are saying right now, issuing like proactive mea culpas, saying we're having a really tough time polling the 2014 election cycle. So I think it is, just when you could ask, where's the governor's race right now, and I said, who has any idea? I mean, it's Rick Scott up in one poll, Charlie Crist up in the next. I think it's clear that Amendment 2 and the concept of medical marijuana continue to be supported by a broad majority of Floridians. I think it's just a question of, is it broad enough to get to that 60% threshold yet? And I believe it is, but we will see in 3 weeks and a few hours here.
Who is the opposition? I've heard them say tobacco and big pharma are opposing this. Is that what you find, or?
Well, the opposition here is largely run by tobacco lobbyists. The treasurer of the campaign, Richard Coates, is a longtime lobbyist for the cigar industry. Their chief spokesman and strategist, Sarah Bascom, is a longtime registered lobbyist for DeSal Tobacco, which is a relatively large Florida cigarette company. They're the ones that sell the 305 cigarettes for $4 a pack and market them to mostly poor and minority communities. There has not been any direct big pharma money here in Florida, but big pharma has funded a lot of these national anti-drug groups and national anti-marijuana groups. And there's this guy Kevin Sabet, who's thankfully spent a lot more time in Oregon this election than he has in Florida, because he's a nice guy, but he annoys the heck out of me. His group, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, has received some pretty substantial grants from some pharmaceutical companies, and some pharmaceutical companies have paid a doctor to kind of go around and do speeches for them. But this campaign has been funded largely by one guy, Sheldon Adelson, who owns casinos out in Las Vegas and also in Macau. And I don't know why he's funding this campaign. I know he has a son who died of a drug overdose, and he firmly believes that marijuana is a gateway drug that ultimately led to the death of his son, and it's a horrible thing, and certainly can't argue with the grieving parent. But yeah, I mean this campaign has largely been run by both kind of the Republican establishment in Tallahassee and also representatives of the Florida tobacco industry. So,
Any final questions or any final comments?
I'm just wondering now, like, where do Kathy Jordan and Tim Morgan get their marijuana now? How are they able to access that? Are they just out there in the illegal market?
I cannot. Yeah, they're in the illegal market. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you where Tim gets it. I know this because it's been heavily reported on. I mean, Kathy's husband Bob grows it for her at their home. It was right around the time that we launched this campaign. Kathy and Bob got a knock on their door by some masked, guns-drawn Manatee sheriff's deputies who came into their home and took their plants. But they grow this stuff for themselves at home, and Bob administers it to his wife, and they are, even though the state's attorney did not press charges against them and has pretty much said that they will not, there could be a new state's attorney who will, and the sheriff has never given them a guarantee that they won't get that same knock on the door and actually be arrested and charged this time around. So yeah, they are, they're very sick people who having to live as criminals on a day-to-day basis because of the laws that we have in the books here. And I think that's just it's wrong and it's unfair, and it's I believe the core reason that Floridians should vote yes on Amendment 2.
Anything else you'd like to add in closing, Ben?
No, just that I think you guys in thinking about what you're going to editorialize on this should first of all read the Supreme Court's opinion on the matter and understand that a lot of these so-called loopholes have been addressed very clearly by the court. They are not in fact loopholes, and then the other so-called loopholes are in fact the process of implementing a constitutional amendment. These things don't exist in a vacuum. They require legislative action after the fact. There's actually a very good article in the Tampa Bay Times and the Miami Herald by Mary Ellen Klaus that ran on the 12th, on Sunday, that really details the process of how a constitutional amendment gets implemented, specific to this amendment. So I think, there again, the opposition to this is not arguing against medical marijuana because they don't have an argument against medical marijuana. Medical marijuana helps people, period. It is not a controversial position to take to say that people should be able to follow their doctor's orders without having to be criminals. It is not a controversial position to take to say, I would break the law today to help somebody that I loved who is suffering if they could benefit from this. Those laws shouldn't have to be broken. We should change those laws, and that's what Amendment 2 does, and that's why you guys should tell your readers to vote yes on Amendment 2, and that's why your readers should, regardless of what you tell them to do, should vote yes on Amendment 2.